Stand by one moment, please. Okay, sorry about that. There you go.
Okay. So many of you may recall that back in January, the court in the city's litigation with Sinclair, Haberman, and Belair buildings issued a decision and order awarding damages to the Haberman plaintiffs, totaling approximately $131 million. 131 is the number that's been bandied about for several months, but that number was subject to being increased for interests and costs. On May 17th, the court actually entered the formal judgment. That formal judgment totaled over $140 million and continues to accrue interest today and will continue to accrue interest until it is paid, settled, or reversed on appeal. As of December 31st, 2021, that judgment will total approximately $148.9 million. And again, will continue to accrue at approximately $1.1 million a month. In addition to the monetary liability, the court found that the Habermans were also entitled, pursuant to stipulations and variances that were granted to them in the 80s, to build their project, which consisted of two 10-story buildings and a 7-story buildings. That was called the Sea Point Towers project. Now, this litigation has been pending for almost or over 30 years. It has been something that the city has faced, has been hanging over the city for that amount of time. And this judgment, again, is approaching $150 million today. In the face of this, the city retained M3 Partners as financial advisors and my firm O'Melveny as restructuring counsel to look at the city's financial situation, to look at the judgment, and to look at the city's existing structural deficits, and to help the city develop a response plan. Since we were retained in March and April, we have been working diligently with the council to develop this plan, to look into this litigation, to look at the city's finances, and to develop a response. If we could move to the next slide. After we had taken a look at the city and the city's finances and the litigation itself, at the direction and with the substantial input of the city council, the city manager, corporation counsel, M3 and O'Melveny, and the city's outside litigation counsel started negotiating with the Habermans to attempt to reach a resolution to this judgment. None of the advisors to the city believed that continuing to pursue this litigation, the appeal of this litigation, continuing to subject the city to the risk of having to pay an over $150 million judgment made sense in the context of this case and the city's finances. So the city and its advisors proactively negotiated with the Haberman parties over a settlement. We, as professional advisors, looked and advised the city and the city council on the ability of Long Beach to pay incremental debt service associated with either the judgment or a settlement. We looked at sources of liquidity that could be tapped to partially pay the settlement. We looked at what would be required in property tax increases to pay for a judgment or to pay for a settlement, and other areas of revenue enhancements that could be tapped into. We've looked also at the impact on the city's credit ratings from a settlement or lack of a settlement. And of course, we looked at the strategic alternatives as we've discussed when we first were engaged back in April. And those strategic alternatives included continuing to pursue the appeal or a potential bankruptcy for the city. Again, we're very pleased that the negotiations over the last several months have resulted in an agreed letter of intent with the Haberman parties. What that letter of intent is it's an agreement to use good faith efforts to negotiate a formal settlement agreement over the next 3 months. That formal agreement would finally and fully resolve the litigation. This letter of intent is only the first step. It is an agreement to work together to finalize a formal agreement. We could go to the next slide. The importance of the letter of intent is that it lays out the structure that has preliminarily been agreed to between the city and the Habermans that would settle the lawsuit. The most important thing about the letter of intent is once that it's approved, the interest on the judgment will stop for the period during which we are negotiating the formal agreement. The formal agreement will be complicated, and there are many things we have to work out between now and then. But this gives the city breathing room to not continue to accrue the $1 million a month that would otherwise accrue while trying to document this agreement. If we do reach an agreement within the next 90 days, then the interest is further stayed until the formal agreement becomes effective. I'll go through what it'll take for the formal agreement to become effective. And if the parties don't reach a formal agreement, if this letter of intent doesn't translate into a final settlement, then all parties are restored to their rights. But the city will have had the benefit of a stay of the interest accrual during this period of time. And both the city and the Haberman parties won't have been spending time pursuing the appeal while they're documenting this formal agreement. Again, the appeal is an ongoing process. The city has continued to spend attorney's fees, and the Haberman parties have continued to spend attorney's fees on pursuing the appeal. This letter of intent will provide an opportunity for the city and the Habermans to jointly request that the appellate court stay the appeal so that all parties can stop paying for attorney's fees and attempt to get this settlement done. The settlement contemplates, as I mentioned, a formal agreement. That formal agreement would reduce this $148.9 million as of this week judgment to a cash payment of $75 million by the city. That payment, again, will be made when the formal agreement is effective. And there's an additional $2 million, which it's more detailed in the LOI and will be more detailed in the formal agreement. It's deferred and forgiven if the Habermans do not build, and credited to certain items that the Habermans may have to pay in the future. In exchange for this 50% reduction in a monetary judgment, the LOI does contemplate that the city will enact future zoning legislation that would allow, instead of two 10-story buildings and a 7-story building, it would allow a 13-story building, two 13-story buildings with a penthouse and a parking structure to support that building and the surrounding areas. If this zoning legislation is enacted, the formal agreement would become effective. If it's not, the formal agreement does not become effective. But once the formal agreement is effective, if that zoning legislation is revoked or found invalid, then the city would owe an additional penalty to Haberman. But under no circumstances, once this formal agreement goes effective, will this $150 million judgment come back in play. This formal agreement, once documented, executed, and approved by the council next year, would finally resolve this litigation. If we could go to the next slide. Again, I mentioned that this is a letter of intent. It's the intent of the parties to reach a formal agreement. That formal agreement will provide the specifics of the settlement in more detail than is in the letter of intent, although the letter of intent does have a substantial amount of detail. It's the framework for the settlement. The formal agreement itself will only be effective once it's finalized, finally negotiated, signed by the parties, approved by the city council at a future meeting. It has to be approved by the zoning board as a party to the litigation that's currently pending. And the formal agreement will only be effective if the city is able to raise funds through the issuance of general obligation bonds to fund the settlement. The formal agreement is also contingent on the Habermans providing a satisfaction of judgment and a stipulation withdrawing the cross appeal. The city will likewise withdraw its appeal. and those appeals will be withdrawn once the agreement is effective. Again, as I mentioned before, the formal agreement will only be effective if there is zoning legislation that permits the revised project that's described in the LOI, as I mentioned, 2 13-story buildings with penthouse and a parking structure associated with those buildings. We can move to the next slide. So that's the overview of the letter of intent. We thought it would be helpful for we and M3 to provide some of the background on the financial analysis that underpinned the negotiations and the process that's we've gone through over the last several months. So I would like to turn it over to Brian Griffith from M3 now to address the financial overview.
Thanks, Maria. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having us here. As Maria said, we wanted to provide a quick backdrop to the current settlement efforts from a financial perspective, as well as give an update on how it may ultimately be funded. First off, even before the Haberman judgment, the city had been facing material annual budget deficits, mainly due to certain key issues as follows. One is, low taxes compared to other New York jurisdictions for the level of the city provided services. For the New York State Comptroller data for the calendar year 2020, the city of Long Beach ranked as the 56th lowest in property tax rate out of 60 cities in the state, excluding New York City. Total property tax per assessed property value of 1%, which includes the city and the county for Long Beach, was considerably lower than the New York State average of about 1.42%. For data also provided by the city's municipal advisors, CMA, the tax margin for Long Beach against its allowable tax base for 2020 of 45.4% was considerably lower than the average for New York State of approximately 54%. In addition to the taxes, there has been a robust level of city services relative to the size of the city and its existing tax base. Higher labor costs and obligations to current employees as well as retirees. And in some instances, the city had failed to properly document or enforce certain contracts and other obligations. Donna and Ina have taken critical steps over the past 18 months to correct some of these issues, and those efforts are ongoing. We can go to the next page. In July of this year, Moody's downgraded the city to Baa3, which is one notch above speculative grade. Moody's also issued a negative outlook for the city, which could lead to additional downgrades unless issues are addressed. Moody's main reason for the downgrade was the massive Haberman judgment that had occurred during the period just prior to the downgrade. If the city were not to find a reasonable way to settle the judgment and the city's ratings were to reach junk status, the cost of borrowing would likely more than double and access to the markets may be constricted, leading to service cuts and the need for other potential major drastic actions. We believe that the 50% reduction in the judgment as contemplated in the settlement, along with responsible actions of the city council, will lead to a ratings upgrade over time and reduce future borrowing costs. We can go on to the next slide as well. In order to fund the settlement, the city will have to issue municipal bonds. The bonds will most likely require annual debt service of approximately $5 to $6 million for a period of most likely 15 years. Aside from identifying additional revenues or potential asset sales, the city will need to raise property taxes to help fund this debt service. Any required tax increase will vary based on the ultimate terms of the bond financing and the identification of other sources of revenue or liquidity available. Given all of that, it is too soon to definitively address this impact to taxes. The city is currently reviewing additional opportunities to minimize the impact on the property taxes. All of this will be laid out as the city works on its annual budget process for the upcoming year. With that, I will turn it back to Maria or Donna to continue on.
I think I'm sorry, Maria. Maria or Mo.
No, I was going to say that's the end of our formal presentation. We would submit.
Yeah, Maria, just if you can clarify one point in terms of whether the nature of this is binding and or non-binding, that would be helpful. And the one comment I wanted to add to what Maria and Brian said is that we began. The first time we met, we got retained in March. Maria and her firm got retained in April. So we spent a good 3 or 4 months getting a very detailed diligence working with Donna and Ina and their teams. We had our first meeting with the Haberman Council in early July. So this has been a very, July 6th, in fact, while we were on the phone, I actually looked up that date. In case anybody's concerned that this is being done, sort of last minute or anything like that, it's been a long, painstaking close to 6 month process to get here. And the city council, who I want to thank, it has been involved actively at every step of the way. So that was just a couple of comments I wanted to add.
And this process went through last week. This is not a process that ended a long time ago and is now being put before the parties. The reason that this is a letter of intent, again, is so that we could have an agreement that the interest is stayed while we document a formal agreement. The binding nature of this letter of intent is that the interest is stayed and that the parties will work in good faith to reach a formal agreement. If the parties don't reach a formal agreement, if the council decides not to approve a formal agreement, then there is no agreement and there is nothing binding, and we move forward in litigation, which would be an unfortunate path forward for the city.
All right. Donna, anything else?
No, that's it.
All
Just
right.
questions from the council.
Yeah. So obviously this is a meeting we would prefer not to have had to have, but unfortunately has been the case too often over the last couple of years. We're trying to clean up an inherited mess. And in this case, a 30-plus-year-old mess that has had the can kicked down the road to the point now where the can has hit the wall. So we have to deal with this. There is really no pretty solution to this, but we have been working on this for months and months, and believe that this is in the best interest of the taxpayers of this city. This is really simple arithmetic. 149 million versus 75 million. There's really no choice C. It's A is 149, B is 75, C, there is no C. So while nobody may be happy about this, this is in the interests of the taxpayers of the city to get us out from under this 30-year black cloud, which, as you saw in the presentation, is wreaking havoc on our credit rating and gets us out from under this, and again, lets us get back to fixing things. So with that, I'll ask if there's any questions from the council members. All right, seeing none. Dave, who do we have from the public?
Our first speaker, Roy Lester.
Okay.
Before you get started, Roy, I want to remind everybody, if you want to speak, use the raise your hand function. And you do have 3 minutes. I will be running the timer, and when the timer does go off, I will break in. You'll hear the beeping in the background. Go ahead, Roy.
Okay. John, I understand from the presentation a lot of the fault is because we have the lowest taxes around, or one of the lowest taxes around. I'm not sure the people out there necessarily agree with that that's the problem. But I'm just kind of wondering, first of all, why the rush? A new council's coming in 3 days. This has been going on for 30 years. And now the rush. I mean, we hired these people in March. And I'm not saying they haven't done a great job. I have no idea. We hired them in March. They didn't meet until July. And now, there's a resolution, and I'm being told now it's not really binding, although I don't understand why we would vote on a non-binding resolution, because, if the Haberman suddenly decide, well, you know what, we want 95,000 instead of 75, we basically have no recourse to that. Is that what I'm being told? But anyway, and then the meeting's at 6:30 at night when the normal Tuesday meeting is at 7 o'clock. I just don't understand any of this. There's so many questions here. The people should have an opportunity to ask the questions. I have been asking questions literally for years about the Haberman judgment, for months about O'Malley and 3M, and really have gotten no answers. And now I'm 3 days away from being a councilman. I've been denied any information about this except exactly what the public has. Now, to be fair, I did get the information about the letter of intent 20 minutes before the public. So that was an advantage, but I have no idea of all the sources of liquidity and all the other things that we've been told about. So now all of a sudden, this has to be done at a nighttime meeting in the middle of vacation at, in an unusual time. Why? Why? I just don't understand that. Like you say, they've been working on it for months and months. It's something that we've been living with for 30 years. And I'm not saying it's not a great deal. It might be a great deal. It might not be a great deal. But we, the people, don't know anything about it except what was presented tonight. Do you think that's fair? I mean, I never heard of a transition when an elected official is denied before he comes in all the information about what's going on. You look at the president of the United States, he's entitled to every secret before he's inaugurated. And here in Long Beach, the only municipality that I know of that does this denies the incoming councilman any information about any of the things that are going to affect them. This is an effect on the city of $75 million, $6 million a year of a $49 million tax assessment. So you see what percentage that is. It's a large amount if we're going to have to pay it. And we probably are going to have to pay it. But I don't understand why it's happening this way. Hello.
Okay. Maria, do you want to address any of this? Or?
Sure. I think we addressed a lot of what was raised. This hasn't been rushed. Believe me, this has been a very, very long process that has gone on for many, many months. And it got done now. And this is when it is done. And this is when we have an opportunity to move forward, to document an agreement, to move forward, and to stop the interest accrual.
Okay.
And there will be ample opportunity for the council in the future to have a say on the formal agreement as we move forward.
But not on the letter of intent, Maria. Not on the thing we're voting for tonight. Now, can you explain why it couldn't wait the 3 days for a new council?
I don't think you're talking about 3 days. We're talking about an agreement that was reached that this council has been dealing with 4 months.
And they are leaving it to the new council to come up with $75 million, a bond, and a bond that has to be done within, 5 days after the formal agreement? And also, if there's a successful challenge, not by us, by somebody to the zoning legislation, we lose it all. It all goes down the tubes.
Roy, that's your time.
Of course.
To clarify one point, it wasn't an accurate statement that the money has to be paid within 5 days of the formal agreement. The money has to be paid within 5 days of the formal agreement becoming effective. The formal agreement is not effective until the city gets the money. So that's not an issue.
And quite frankly, it's also worth noting that the people voting on this non-binding letter of intent are the people that actually have been doing the work for months and months on this. It is the people that have all the background, all the knowledge, that actually did the work to get us to this point, are the people voting on it, which is the appropriate measure. And the new council members will have the opportunity to have their say in this, because they have to, as the formal agreement is being negotiated, they will have input into that process, and they will have to approve that formal agreement, as well as the bond, as well as the zoning. There will be 3 pieces to this puzzle that they will be voting on. So what we are doing here now is voting on a framework to get us out from under this $149 million financial hell we are in. And why somebody can't understand a simple concept of 75 million is a heck of a lot less than 149 million is beyond me. And I see Denise Ford is up.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes,
go ahead,
we can.
Denise.
Thank you very much. And but I do have a prepared statement, but in all fairness to Mr. Lester and Tina Postoli, that will be your new city council members, that I really urge you to work with them and give them the information. I know within 3 days they are going to have access to all of this, because it is a very sensitive subject, I guess, when we look at $75 million. So, but I'm glad that this is just basically a letter of intent, and that there will be other, hopefully, more negotiations or more discussions in regard to this. But I will say my statement. I commend the city manager and the city council and all parties for addressing this issue of the lawsuit. It is not an easy decision to make, and you show courage for taking action and working to resolve it in the best interests of our residents and business owners. I believe this could have been avoided, and we would not have a $150 million lawsuit hanging over our heads, with the only viable solution that would be to possibly settle for $75 million, except for the possible missteps and sloppiness of the previous Democrat administrations. Could possible personal likes and dislikes have played into any decisions as well? As a resident, I am angry that we are here, as I know that whatever the outcome, we taxpayers will be paying the bill. I do not believe it is in our best interests to appeal, as we can be held accountable for the $131 million plus accrued interest, as well as legal fees. Obviously, you have kept yourselves focused on this and did due diligence in trying to find a solution. I thank you for not kicking this down the road, as we do not need to keep this lawsuit hanging over our heads. I hope all parties agree to settle, and I know paying $75 million is going to be painful and difficult for many of our residents, as this will undoubtedly raise our taxes. And I hope we can find ways to soften this blow. In closing, I want to say that you are taking on a lot, but should not be held accountable for this. As I said, this lawsuit was brought before you took office, and the blame for the failure to adequately address this goes to the last permanent city managers. Thankfully, they are gone. I urge you to sign the letter of intent, and let's move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And, I just want to add one thing, too, that I guess, well, we as the council know it, but the public should know, too. In choosing O'Melveny and M3, we didn't just open up the yellow pages and kind of scroll and kind of move our finger down the page and see who had the nicest looking ad. These are 2 of the top firms in the entire country that do this. Top firms in the entire country. These are not fly-by-night organizations. These are people that do this at top of their game. And we got them to come in here and represent the city of Long Beach. We were fortunate to be able to get that to represent us. So with that, I see Mr. Depper.
Yes,
Mr. Depper.
hi. I mean, I thought it was going to start at 7 o'clock too, but I figured let me come on early because most of the time I see you come on early. I mean, I can't believe you didn't include Mr. Lester. I saw one of the current council members address him in a remark on his page as councilman. I even put councilman-elect. So to not even show him that respect when he just is coming into, be sworn in 3 days, I mean, I don't see why this couldn't have waited. I'm not going to hold up your night. And I mean, I'm just passing my comment, but I mean, I just became a co-chair and I'm serving now a 2-year term. They included me on any decisions before I started at the United Way. I think it should be done here in City of Long Beach too. And when are we going to get some rapid tests here like New York City has for COVID? I would appreciate it.
Okay,
that's
a separate. Thank you, Mr. Depper. And let me just address that quickly. So this isn't like we were voting on approving a planter somewhere or a waiving of off-street parking requirements. This was sensitive legal information that is protected by attorney-client privilege. And is being protected by attorney-client privilege, that means the information is between the attorney and the client. The client is the city council, the city manager, and the corporation council. Until the new council members are sworn in, they are just members of the public. They are not officers of the city. So in sharing information with them, we would have been basically waiving attorney-client privilege because we would have been sharing information with the public, not between the lawyer and their client. So that's why, in this case, that was because of the nature of the information, that it was sensitive legal information, not some common thing we would just vote on. And I see Mr. Candon is now up.
Thank you. I'm Steve Candon. Oops. Oh, geez. The old picture of myself popped up from work. Sorry about that. Just want to say a couple of things about the decision you guys are doing tonight and the intent of the letter. First off, I want to thank the City Council for their diligence and time and effort. I hear that you're taking on going through this process and taking action, because so many times we see people that form committees, do everything, and then they put everything off to not take action. And the fact that you're taking action tonight and getting the ball rolling instead of kicking the can down the road is just a breath of fresh air for me and to see in government. The fact that you have shown tonight all the details that went into this and the legwork it takes, and the fact that cutting the debt in half, and to me is amazing. I do have a couple questions on the zoning legislation as to how that works. So I'm glad we have time for the next 6 months to go through that, and it's not bound. I'm actually glad about that, because that way we can make sure that it's done that way, where we can hold tight and make this plan a success in the future. But from what I've seen, from the quality of the people that Long Beach have elected, they all elected the 5 people there to do their job, and you're doing it. And I'm sure that when Mr. Lester and Mrs. Pastorelli come in, they're going to do their elected jobs when they're in the duty. I assume when Mike Delory steps down this January 1st, after a great 2-year run of doing an excellent job, he won't be part of things because he's not on city council, just like people before weren't included until they were city council members. So it seems to me that while you're in duty, that's when it applies. And I'm pretty happy that Mr. Lester and Mrs. Pastorelli will be there working hard for us in the future, and I appreciate their efforts. And I hope that this the accomplishments you guys have been doing the last couple of years to get this everything back on track continues, because it's been wonderful to see the hard work and all the due diligence you guys have been doing. And I see a lot of great changes at Long Beach because of what you're doing. So thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Steve. Do we have anyone else, Dave?
Yep. Wait. Mr. Miller.
I see Assemblywoman Miller. Okay.
Hi, everybody. Hi. I really want to applaud the city council, the city manager. We've heard and we all know that this is the problem that it is because it has been ignored for so many years and just pushed on to the next administration, which doesn't help anybody. And so, while I do applaud and I think, that it needs to be settled and everybody move forward, I do feel for the residents who are going to have to absorb this by higher property taxes, even knowing and understanding that you have the lowest property taxes, or it doesn't help the situation when you get hit with a big increase in taxes. And especially with COVID, with everything that's gone on in the past couple of years, I recognize that for some that might be quite a struggle. So, I am aware of that as well, and I empathize with those. But I do think that this is the right move, and I thank you all for working diligently to get this moving forward. It's necessary and it's time.
Okay, thank you, Missy. All right. Dave, is there anyone else?
Tina, possibly.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me? I have a weird.
Yes,
yes,
okay,
we
great.
can.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say, I wanted to thank you to the city council and to the administration and all for working so hard on this. I know how hard this has been for you all. I don't truly know. I'm about to find out, but I know it's an important step. Very important step to finally getting this albatross from around our necks. And while it's hard and these decisions are very hard, I feel what's laid out in the letter of intent that I had read is really the best way forward at the moment and for the taxpayers. I know it's going to be a long, challenging road ahead, and I want folks to know I'm committed to working with all of you all, the new council, the city, and administration in the best interest of our residents and to do the best job possible on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina. And there is going to be a lot of work ahead for all of us.
Yes.
Roy included. So, and we all have the same end goals here, what's best for the city. So we're going to have our work cut out for us.
Okay.
So thanks. Anyone else, Dave?
That was it.
Okay. Seeing that, I guess we can move on to the voting.
Move on to the voting portion. Okay. So item 1 is a resolution approving a letter of intent between the City of Long Beach and Sinclair Haberman and Belair Building LLC. Who would introduce and move the adoption of this item?
I will.
Second?
I will.
Voting, Councilmember Delury.
This will be my last vote of this elected term, and I'm happy to vote yes. I'm very confident in this team who I see here today. They're not going away. They're going to be taking this through, hopefully, to the end. And I'm still here with you guys. Thank you.
Councilmember Mandel.
Yes.
Councilmember Treston.
I too have a couple of words. We've come to a very difficult decision. Experts and professionals were hired in the field to assist us to make this as palatable as possible. I would like to thank the firms of M3 Partners and O'Melveny and Myers for their guidance. Corporation Counsel Rich Berrios, and our city manager, Donna Gaydon, for their resoluteness. There have been a few times when we all thought this letter of intent was not to be. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for saving our city so that we may be able to find footing and to become a thriving, responsible city in my lifetime. I understand that it is almost ingrained in our Long Beach DNA, as we have lived here for so long, to find someone to blame. The time for blame may or may not come, as this is a case that will need to be autopsied. It has been a cancer upon our city, a malignant cancer that was ignored for far too long. No municipality should be ever put in this position. No elected official should ever have to make these very difficult choices that will impact each of us moving forward. You have trusted me to make decisions and assessments, and for that, I am most days appreciative. My colleagues and I promised that we would address these challenging and complex findings and not sweep things under the rug for another council or administration to discover and be astonished. I am going to request that if you have questions, to contact our administration. Please do not engage in the spin and the malice. You must remember that this case is older than some of the people in this virtual room. Once again, thank you to all the parties involved in signing this letter of intent, that we can move the proverbial ship off its moorings and into the water. And with that, I vote yes.
Vice President McGinnis.
Good evening. I have a few comments. I put a lot of thought into this, and I wanted to try to document what it's been like to go through this process for the past, 6 to 9 months as a resident first, so that you know that this decision is not made lightly. I'll start off by saying that this council committed to sustainable change almost 2 years ago when we decided to hire a city manager that didn't even know Long Beach existed, never mind heard of this matter in front of us today. What city manager did was bring her years of professional municipal finance experience and clear, objective eyes to our financial situation. Fortunately, thanks to Senator Kaminsky and the New York State Financial Restructuring Board, City Manager Gaydon was able to secure 2 of the best financial restructuring bankruptcy firms in the country, M3 Partners and O'Melveny Myers, to assess the city's dire financial situation and provide recommendations. First on their list was to arrive at a settlement for the Haberman judgment, because it was on the top of the list of Moody's Investor Services list of items for Long Beach to address to improve our credit status. And what M3 and O'Melveny Myers have brought to the table is best-in-class professional experience and even more clear, objective eyes to our financial situation. Moshe Mehi, the managing partner of M3, on this Zoom call has led some of the most significant financial restructurings in recent years, including serving as the chief restructuring officer of Sears Holdings Corporation, Barney's Inc., and Capmark Financial Group, amongst others. In 2021, Mo was appointed to the board of directors of the Nassau County Interim Finance Authority, NIFA, that legislator Ford deals with. Law partner Maria DeCanza on this call from O'Melveny Myers has been on the best lawyers in America list since 2020. Her practice area specialties are bankruptcy and creditor debtor rights, insolvency, and reorganization law. This team has worked tirelessly with the city staff to understand our financial position and our city, and with us, the council, in meetings over many months in order to go ahead and negotiate a settlement agreement with Haberman's legal team. M3 and O'Melveny Myers reviewed multiple scenarios with relevant senior staff and this council as the negotiations progressed. We met for hours at a time, asked every question possible, reviewed every scenario possible, and then we asked them for more information as we came closer to an agreement. No longer was it City Manager Gaydon and M3 and O'Melveny Myers that had clear, objective eyes into our financial situation and where we needed to land to come to an agreement with Haberman. It was painstakingly clear to the 5 of us on this council as well. At the end of the day, there is no panacea here. This judgment is not going away on its own. It costs the city more each and every day because of interest. It's easy to blame, it's easy to make excuses, but I believe the residents put us here to face problems such as this head on, to close this disastrous and embarrassing chapter in our history at as minimal a cost as possible. We will now move forward, focusing on how to minimize the effects of this outcome on our residents and future residents, but it will involve some really tough decisions and sacrifices for all of us. If there's one thing we are as a community, it is resilient. I know if we work together, we can innovate. We can make it through this challenge too. Upon the complete and thorough analysis by this council, City Manager Gaydon, the city staff, and the teams of M3 and O'Melveny Myers, it is my opinion that M3 and O'Melveny Myers have negotiated the absolute best possible settlement with Haberman. I vote yes.
President Bendo.
Okay, well, I said most of my piece in the beginning, but I guess I'll just say, look, this is a vote none of us wish we had to take. But this was dumped in our lap, unfortunately, from 30 years ago, and we have had to deal with it. It is our job as your elected representatives to get you the best deal humanly possible in this very ugly situation. There was no pretty solution here, quite frankly. But we got what we believe, and our legal team and our financial advisors believe, is the best deal for the taxpayers of this city. And at the end of the day, that is what you elected us to do. Should you be happy about the fact that we're going to owe $75 million? No. But you shouldn't be happy that somebody did this to us 30 years ago, because like all of you, we are taxpayers too here. We pay our taxes too. We get the tax bills. So we are all in this together. And we did the best that we could for the taxpayers of this city. And while, again, nobody's going to be happy with the fact that we got to write this check, this is the best deal that we could have gotten for you. So with that, I vote yes.
We make a motion to close the meeting.
I will.
Second?
I will. I was muted, sorry.
Voting, Councilmember Delory.
Yes.
Councilmember Mandel.
Yes.
Councilmember Treston.
Yes.
Vice President McGinnis.
Yes.
President Bendo.
Yes. Folks, we wish you all a very happy New Year. Happy Kwanzaa, if you celebrate Kwanzaa. Have a very good New Year, and we will see you in a few days with a new council, with 2 new council members. Again, my thanks to Scott for his 10 years of service to the city, and Mike for his 2 years. They worked hard on getting us to where we are tonight on this vote, and their services will be missed. So thank you both. And again, everyone, have a healthy, happy New Year, and we'll see you again in a few days. Have a good night.
You do the
Thank
same,
you.
John.
Thank you, John. Everybody stay safe. Have a good night.
You too.